Chris Balme from Millennium School. He's a co-founder and also principal of the school. And今日は本当に久しぶりなんですけれども、とてもこういったコロナの状況で、どういうふうにされてるかなって思ってたところ、皆さんと一緒に今日お話ができる時間が持ててとても嬉しく思っております。So, yeah, it's been a while since the last time I saw you in Tokyo, but I'm sure lots happened this year with the COVID-19, and for good or bad, it's the same experience everybody in the world is having, right? So I think people in Japan are very interested in learning about how you and your staff or your teachers are coping with this rapid change with the student lives at the Millennium School, including families, and how you have been sort of dealing with the change for the past 9 to 10 weeks. And from there, I would like to talk about like what you find the benefits of online learning, and etc. So let's start from hearing from like how kind of what your approach has been before COVID in terms of your school kind of, since half the people never didn't know about Millennium so much, maybe it will be helpful to kind of start from before COVID. What's the philosophy of the school and what are sort of the special tenets of the schools that everyone's so interested in about?
Great. Thanks, Emmy. It's good to be here, and I only wish I could see everyone because I miss everyone from the workshops. It's good to see you in this way and to meet some new people. So a brief background on the school. So we're serving early adolescents, so roughly 11 to 14 years old, and we chose to create what we think of as a laboratory school because it seems like this age is where we misunderstand kids the most. So, when you look at the kind of span of K through 12, at least in this country, but I think it's probably true elsewhere. I think a lot of kids lose engagement at this age. When they're 11 and 12 and 13, they start to feel like school is a game. It's boring. It doesn't feel personal. Their interests are elsewhere. They might have conflict with parents. And I think for a lot of kids, this is a time when they start to conclude that they don't want to put their full self into it. So we wanted to start a school first to understand what is going on developmentally in people at this age. And if we understand them developmentally, in terms of their neurology, their bodies, their emotions, could we design a better form of education that would meet them developmentally and tap into their drives versus having to fight against what they want, which is what I think traditionally this age of middle school or junior high feels like. So our school, we've been on this journey for 7 years. We opened our doors to students 4 years ago. And essentially we're collaborative of several universities and researchers to try to create a really radically different form of education for this age group in particular. We changed the calendar so that instead of learning just a little bit every day, we learn in bursts where we get to go deep and follow an emotional cycle of learning. We change how inside the day the time works. Instead of typical classes, we have what we call quests, which is a kind of interdisciplinary and real world oriented projects where your final work is to present to an audience outside the school, to actual experts. And then we put a lot of focus on figuring out who you are, since this is a time of identity development more than anything. And if school speaks to that and helps kids understand their emotions and their relationships, then kids conclude that school actually is real and it gets them and it's worth it. So that's a little bit about the school. I can say much more, but hopefully that gives some context.
Well, thanks, Chris. Sorry, I think there is some glitches with the online live captioning. So I just wanted to kind of follow up this part with the audience a little bit. すいません、皆さんちょっと字幕の方がクリスがお話ししてたところが、うまく出ていなかったようなので、今日、チャットの方に、日本語での概要の説明について、 ご案内していると思うんですけれども、もし画面を開くことができる方は、そちらの方を使っていただけますでしょうか。で、ちょっとここまでクリスが話していたことを、本当にちょっとだけつまんでご紹介すると、ミレニアムスクールは発達科学をベースにしてデザインした学校でして、発達科学っていうのはその子どもの発達段階を4段階ぐらいで考えていて、でその子に合った発達に合わせた、学習環境を提供しているっていう学校なんですけれども、非常にその温かいような学校を訪れていたって本当温かい学校なんですけれども、子どもたちが探求する学びをですね、いきなり探求から入るというよりはですね、環境をちゃんと整えて、クエストという、探求学習なんですけれども、よりその個々の、興味関心に合わせたようなものなんですが、そういったものに取り組んでいらっしゃるということをお話しされていました。Sorry, Chris. There's always glitches for the first time we try something new.
That's part of the journey of all of this.
Hopefully, the audience is tolerant to come with us on this journey. But can you just speak a little bit about how you're handling the transition with the distance learning, especially when you are so focused on emotional and social learning for children, as well as Quest? They both seem to require quite a bit of human connections, right?
Definitely.
So I'm sure it's a big trial for you as well, but we would like to know how have you been managing it so far?
Yeah. So I guess I'll first say one of the metaphors we return to again and again in the whole school design, even before this, was the idea of the hero's journey. And this is a concept of kind of looking at myth from across different cultures and finding a common pattern, that there's a series of stages that is often described when you talk about a heroic journey. So I personally think that the reason that pattern is common is that it describes adolescence, that always the heroic journey starts reluctantly. The hero doesn't want to go on the journey. The hero is comfortable where they are. And then something pulls you out of it, and you have no choice but to start trekking through unfamiliar territory. And I think that's how most young people experience adolescence. They don't choose when it starts. It's not always comfortable, but it will transform you, and you hope to have a journey that brings you back home ultimately. So we think about that a lot with the school, and then we thought about it with coronavirus, that this is a form of hero's journey. No one would choose this. We're getting tossed out of our familiar world. We're used to doing things a certain way, and none of that's going to work anymore. And so how do we take it with that spirit of, we know that we're on a journey that's going to transform us? So I think I just wanted to mention that first, because I think how it's kind of like our posture toward the problem. And I think it's helped us be a little more forgiving of ourselves, and hopefully stay humble, that we don't know the answers. We're out there making mistakes. We're just going to be learning a lot through this. So we began with that, and then we set kind of 3 design values as we started thinking about this. We said, first, we wanted to design for well-being, noticing that this is a time of extreme stress, and adolescents are already in a time that has extreme stress by how much they're changing. Second was designing for equity, feeling that this situation was going to make equity problems worse. And the third one that's always been a theme for us is designing for the real world, that we want everything that we're asking students to do to feel obviously relevant, not something that we have to manipulate or trick anyone into wanting to do. So with that, we started making a lot of changes, and we've kept changing. It reminds me when we first opened the school. But I'll say a few things about student wellness first, since you spoke about the emotional piece. So we decided we want to start and end every day with advisory. Advisory is a small group check-in of about 10 students and one advisor. And much of the middle part of their day can be done independently or asynchronously, but the start and end 30 minutes is always done together on a Zoom call with just your advisees. And that's really become kind of the foundation of the student experience. I think it is to some extent even when we were in person, but it's even more important online. And that's the time when we're trying to help kids connect through distance. We know for most adolescents, their happiness is about their ability to connect. And they have such a strong desire, but it's so hard to do when you're online, especially for a young person, for most young people, that it's hard to make small talk or to have a casual connection when you're staring at someone on the screen and it feels like you're being watched. So our first work was to create that rhythm of advisory beginning and ending each day, and just to have games and prompts and other ways that would help kids still share and still feel connected even when everything else is changing. Oh, Emmy, I can't hear you. I don't know if it's still muted.
Oh, sorry. You touched on the interesting point about the advisory. And in Japan, there is been a lot of talk about like wanting to have kind of we call homeroom, but like a time between teacher and the students. And because only 5% of the schools in Japan have been able to have classes on interactive basis, most of the schools haven't had a chance to have these kind of engagement. And in your case, you had a chance to have advisory every day at the end of the day.
Yep, and beginning of the day.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, we found that really, really helpful. I know it's not easy for other schools always to replicate that, but we found even if a lot of the academics are still delivered independently, even if it's worksheets or, in our case, putting things up on Google Classroom for kids to do independently, as long as they have those check-ins to start and end the day, that creates or maintains a basic level of connection.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. How have you been running your like a project-based learning that you call Quest? Or have you been, I heard from a lot of international schools that they had to kind of scale back or cut back the curriculum in order to meet the students' wellness and needs during the distance learning. And how have you approached in terms of trying to cover the curriculum versus kind of focusing on the students' well-being?
Yeah.
And
that's been an interesting road. So the first week we went online, our aim was to do everything that we were doing in class online. At the end of the first week, we were so exhausted. Everyone was stressed out and unhappy that we said for week 2, our aim is to do 75% as much content. And at the end of week 2 and 3, we were so exhausted and stressed and coping well. And so for week 4, we said we're going to go to 50% and really push ourselves to simplify. And that's where we've stayed. That seems to be working for now, at least. And it doesn't mean students can't go further. What we kind of went back to the theme of low floor, high ceiling, where the expectation for everyone is going to be about half the amount of workload that we had before, which is a big change. And there was some pushback. But then there will be optional extensions. So for students who are thriving in this or have the supports at home, then they can go much farther if they want. But that ratio seems to be working. And I think it's made some of our academics stronger, because it's easy to make things too complicated. And the complicated stuff gets forgotten. So we really wanted to boil it down to what is the essence of what we're trying to teach in each class.
I want to come back to the point of sort of letting go, because you mentioned that that's something you're learning about it as well as a team. But in Japan, we have a national kind of standard curriculum which makes it relatively challenging for people to think, oh, let's cut back here and there, because it's mandatory in terms of number of hours for mastery, as well as the content blocks. So how are you trying to meet sort of the state standards, or is that it's not something that you don't have to follow so strictly?
I think we do have a lot more flexibility here. We're lucky as an independent school and a lab school. We don't have maybe quite the same level of content standards that you have. I do think, though, that even within those content standards, there are often ways to simplify and to get down to what is the essence of this given unit of learning. And I think sometimes there have to be trade-offs made. You know, when we were designing the school, we visited project-based schools all over the world. And I remember one in Finland where they spoke about they had to also cut their curriculum in half when they went from traditional to project-based. And they did that with full confidence that the skills that they would be developing were worth more than the little bits of knowledge that wouldn't be memorized. So it's not an easy transition from a policy level, but I think educators understand how to do that if they're given permission.
I see. So that's something that the government can take into consideration. Right now, I think the conversation, that the direction we are taking seems to be more about like delaying the school year, because our school year starts in April, but there's a conversation about delaying it to September, which would be aligning with the sort of US or international, a lot of the international standards, but at the same time, it would be a huge social change. So there's been a big debate going on around that in Japan right now.
Interesting.
Yeah,
it would be that much easier.
It's very interesting. The government is trying to move that through in a few months' time, which is a pretty massive change.
Which speaks to the opportunity in this, that, you know, I don't know if that per se is a positive or negative change, but there is a chance to make changes here that otherwise wouldn't happen.
In terms of the school day, just so that everyone have a little bit more clear picture of how kids spend a day at Millennium School, can you kind of give me how kids used to spend a day versus how they are doing it right now?
Yeah, so typically before this, it was 8:30 to 3:30. We start the day with a morning meeting where the entire school is gathered in one place. We do mindfulness together, make announcements, and then we go into Quest, which is kind of that deep dive project-based time, and spend essentially the whole morning in Quest with a break from movement in the middle. Then lunch, and in the afternoon, we know that attention spans are smaller. So there we have a shorter rotation of 3 short blocks, about an hour each, where they have more of a skills focused time. So physical, creative, language, and math. And then we close with advisory time. So in this new version, we shortened the day, made it 9 to 3. So cut a half an hour on either side. In place of a big group morning meeting, we did advisory in the morning. So we found large Zoom calls are just not great for kids all the time. It can be done for special occasions. And also long Zoom calls are not great. So we shortened it to do advisory in small groups for a half an hour. Then they have a 5-minute Zoom call. So just really a check-in. Make sure everybody has what they need. This is for each class for their Quest. Answer any quick questions, take attendance. And then half of the days they have independent work for the rest of the morning. Half the days they have more Zoom calls, more of an active teaching style. But even on the independent days, the teachers are available, kind of online office hours during that time.
I see. So in terms of the half independent work time and half active learning, you mentioned about 5 minutes of online learning time. So you only have like interactive lessons for 5 minutes, or?
On half of the days, that's it. So every day that block begins with a check-in, and for half of the days we stop after 5 minutes. They have independent work to do, and the teachers remain available online, so you can log on to that at any point and ask questions.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So we found sometimes if there's too much live meeting time, kids check out. Adults do too, I think. So we wanted to make that more special. So they have a quick check-in on some days, but then they know the adults are there when they need them.
Are you splitting your class into even smaller groups now that in terms of Zoom, I think it's hard to have like so many dozens of people on one screen? And
our class sizes were already about 15 students, so we've kept it at that size.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yep. And then your advisory is about 10 kids.
Advisory is about 10, exactly.
Just so some people may not know what advisory is, can you kind of paint a little bit more picture on what advisory versus what the homeroom teacher, the traditional school concept is?
Yeah, the advisory is really the heart of the school. So the idea is, if you're going on a heroic journey and you're transforming, you're 12 years old and things are happening you've never had happen before, it really helps to have a group that you really trust, where you can say what's on your minds. If what's on your mind is that you're so angry at your mom, you can say that right now. If it's that you're stressed about homework, or you want to ask someone out on a date and you're not sure how to do that, whatever it is, we want to create a really trusting space. So that advisory group, the center of it is an adult who's willing to be real and weird and authentic and vulnerable. So that adult needs to be ready to be really honest with kids, share their own mistakes, be open to whatever conversation might come up. And we have a lot of structures for that, some of which we taught at those workshops. And so on a given day of advisory, sometimes it's going deep because someone's sharing something that's really important to them. And other times it can be more playful. Time to play a game. Now we've been playing online games. Time to, it could be any kind of silly thing that helps get conversation started. So it's not too much like a traditional homeroom. It's
right.
Yeah, it has a different feel to it.
Are you still practicing forum as part of the advisory? Do you mind explaining a little bit about forum and also how that's being carried out online?
Yeah, so forum is a particular technique for having authentic group conversations. So it's something that we've borrowed from executive education and from practices like nonviolent communication. But essentially, it's a way for any group, could be adults or kids, to listen deeply to each other and help each other process what's going on in each of their lives. So that advisory does forum once per week. So kind of Wednesday mornings are a special time for us. There's a full hour each Wednesday, and that's true online also, to do the forum work. And you give personal updates about your life, how it's going in different domains. You learn mindfulness tools and psychological tools to manage emotions, to listen well to each other, resolve conflicts. So I've been really happily surprised that has been working online better than I thought, actually.
Oh, really?
I was worried that it would feel, awkward or no one would speak. But it hasn't happened. I think it's because kids want the connection and because they had familiarity in person first. So they're kind of building on a base of some trust that was already there.
So in terms of incoming, I guess you don't have a problem with that, because in Japan, our school year starts in April. A lot of the incoming class have to start homerooms online, and that was their first time. But in your case, because it's September through June, kids have already known each other.
Right.
That helps.
Soon. Yeah, I mean, there's a chance we'll still be in distance learning mode when we come back after the summer. Oh, that will be new territory.
Yeah. Speaking about the fall or the new coming year, I'm just curious, what's the vision that you have for fall kind of curriculum with a potential distance learning and potential kind of real school, but with a real mindful attention to the safety of children.
It's not clear yet. I mean, I think there are 6 different scenarios that we're planning for, everything from back to normal to still 100% online, and then many in between. It's really tricky. We don't know yet which scenario will be required to do based on what the government will say at that point. We do know, though, that there are some things that we've learned online that we would keep doing even when we go back in person, whenever that is. I think one thing this has pushed us to do is to have faculty collaborate even more than we did already. That instead of each faculty kind of creating their own course, we have created courses together that they can each teach the same version of, and do more team teaching, since that there's not any obstacle to that. Some of the reasons we don't do that before were simply the size of our spaces. But when it's independent work with small group check-ins, you could have a group of faculty create a course and they could all teach it, even taking turns teaching different parts of it online. And that is actually a lot more fun for faculty to not feel alone in how they teach. And for kids, they might find that they connect better with one of their science teachers. And so now they don't have to just, be stuck with whichever teacher they got assigned to, but the whole science department is teaching this course and you can ask whichever teacher you prefer for help.
So the kids can choose which teacher to work with in the same discipline? That is very interesting.
We're starting to test that out, of having there just be one STEM. We use that acronym of science, technology, engineering, math, one STEM quest, instead of, we usually have 3 different ones going at the same time. So we're experimenting. What if the whole school is doing the same subject, the same project at the same time? And then you can have teachers collaborate and students can connect with different teachers for help.
Oh, that's wonderful. So there's always, even in a setback situation, there's always opportunities for change. And how about, lastly speaking, families? I guess families would have to carry more responsibilities to care for children during this time. And how have you been collaborating with the families to support kids' well-being?
Yeah, part of it is thinking about the family well-being. This situation has caused crisis for some families, and other families at our school are same as always, doing fine. So that's part of the reason that we wanted to reduce the academic intensity, because we know there are some kids where there's so much going on at home that it wouldn't be fair to ask them to do the same pace. And that's where that idea of low floor, high ceiling really felt important. Also on just very technical equity terms, making sure everyone had internet access and distributing internet devices when that was useful. Those things have really felt important. And then more on the connection side, I've been recording a short video and sending it out every day. I'm hearing that that's helping both students and parents just feel more connected to the school. As I think everyone is now getting way more email than they ever have, kids and adults, and it's overwhelming.
Yes.
So another email update from the school is not what anyone needs. But sometimes a short video can break through the chatter and creates a much more personal connection. So that's something that seems to be really helping.
Right. I'm just curious, do you have any tips for parents in terms of how they may be able to support kids better? Like, can you share some of the things you're sharing in the video?
Yeah. One thing we love talking about is the idea of beginner's minds. That, if you imagine beginning a new hobby and you're learning something that is just for fun, like you're learning how to paint or how to ride a bicycle, there's a spirit about that where you're patient with yourself. You don't expect to get it right the first time. You are willing to accept help. You're not taking it personally. So we talk about that. It's something that parents and their children can share. That this is new for both of them at the same time, so they can both be in beginner's minds. Most parents have not been working from home. Most parents have not had their kids at home. And so we're all learning what this is like together, and that means we should expect many mistakes and just make them fruitful mistakes, make the mistakes that we learn from. So that's one. Another a part of that is that for kids, a big challenge has been executive function, meaning how do you manage all the information coming at you, your emails, Google Classroom in our case, how do you manage your time and attention? And that's also something that adults struggle with. So perhaps because they didn't get taught it in school. So that's something that parents and kids can share advice. You know, parent is learning how to be on Zoom calls all day, and so is their 13-year-old. So they can exchange advice and feel more on the same team. And the last thing I'd say is encouraging parents to elevate the relationship over the schoolwork. So if forcing your kid to do homework is destroying your relationship with them, it's probably not worth it. This is a unique time in history, and certainly in each of our lives and family lives. So we are encouraging families to put their relationship quality ahead of schoolwork and to be in touch with us if they need to make changes to expectations at school as a result.
Great, thank you. I think we have a lot of questions from the audience. So let me switch gear from here and address some of the questions. I think beginner's mind is so true. I think some of the participants survey also said they're really appreciating the joy of being together with family and trying something new together. So I think it's a universal theme. So there is a big interest about students' motivation, especially during adolescence period. So in terms of the motivation, like what are some of the things that the support that you're providing? I heard about advisory, trying to keep their motivation by not having such a long Zoom call and things like that. But are there some additional tips for families or teachers in terms of kids who are not so motivated being at home, not with friends, or not so much pressure to do extra mile?
Yes. So when we think about motivation, we always go back to this idea of developmental drives. And this will be familiar to those who went to the workshop, that from all of our research and our work, we feel like there are 3 essential drives for adolescents. And this is where their motivation naturally is. So our job as a parent or a teacher is to help them access these drives. So those 3 are in the form of questions. Who am I? Which is about discovering their authentic identity. How do I relate to others? That they, more than almost anything else, want to feel connected socially and like they belong. And the third, what will I contribute to the world? That they want to feel valuable and capable and like what they're doing actually matters. So whenever we wonder about motivation, even outside of a pandemic situation, it's about how is what we're doing connected to those 3 drives. As when you do connect, they're there with you. They're curious about what's changing in themselves and how to be friends and how to stay connected and what is the meaning of all of this. So we've designed our courses to try to feel relevant in this time. So for example, one of our STEM quests is about citizen science. So how do individual people get to do real science and contribute to big sets of data that can mean something? Because that's something that we all are doing now, stuck at home and trying to understand what's going on. So I think for parents too, sometimes kids at this age can seem self-centered, but I think they're not really. It's just that they're changing so much. If one of us was changing this much, we would be wanting to talk about ourselves and reflect on ourselves all the time. So to embrace that and let there be lots of questions and discussion about identity and friendship, since that is what matters most for this age.
In terms of the screen time in particular, I know this subject comes up even during the real school time. And I remember your school students voluntarily decided to put the phones in a box to keep themselves away from the allure. And now at home with a 24-hour access to devices, are there some recommendations that that you have to families, because you don't want to be too forceful to kind of create tension, but at the same time you want to have certain expectations, I would imagine. And
yeah, this has been hard. When we began distance learning, we asked families. So at school we have a no phone policy that students put them in a box. At what you're referencing, that this was their choice. And so when we started, we asked families to have the same policies, no phones during the school day, and it totally failed. We realized after about a week, all parents had given up and their kids had their phones again. So we had to acknowledge defeat, surrender in that case. What we did do, though, is we recognized that it would be helpful to have some structure and accountability around taking time away from screens. So we created these wellness blocks throughout the day, where kids were asked to step away from their screen, gave them lots of different suggestions for what they could do, go outside if they're able to, stretch, move, get food, and ask them to just write up a short, one sentence or fill out a quick survey, what they did. And there were no classes, no office hours during that time. So you didn't have to just find time. There was structured time for it. And I think that's helped a little. I think it's still been a struggle for kids, in front of screens all day. But the more structured the wellness time has been, the better it seemed to have gone.
Oh, that's a nice tip. I try to work out with my kids myself as well, and it's been a really nice way to bond as well.
Yeah.
In terms of individual kid, I guess in Japan, traditional education's be more about sort of standardized curriculum. Everybody will get the same curriculum at the same time. But I think Millennium School has such an individual, personalized approach to education. And the question from the audience is, how are you supporting kids who are not necessarily socially active, or maybe because other kids are so smart, I'm not good enough. Some kids might be feeling a little inferior to others during adolescence. How are you supporting kids who are like that before COVID and now with the COVID?
It's been really interesting to us that who is succeeding and who is struggling has changed a lot in this version. There are some kids who were struggling in a classroom who are thriving in distance learning. And sometimes that's kids who are highly introverted or highly distractible. And sometimes it's actually easier for them to work alone at home. And conversely, there are kids who they need that kind of social momentum of being part of a group doing something in order to stay focused. And those kids are struggling much more in distance learning. So that's been part of our re-education of figuring out how to differentiate in this mode. But a couple of small things. We've really loved the chat feature.
Oh, really?
Zoom and Google Meets. It really helps kids. It lowers the threshold to participation. It's hard to throw your voice out into a group, especially as, for most young people, but to type something out on chat, it's a low barrier. So encouraging more of that, even making parts of the conversation chat only. For example, at the end of some of our classes, we've done this with some adult, some parent classes too, we will play music and then have a final question, and everyone is chatting out their response. And it's actually been a really sweet way. Everyone can participate, whereas in a classroom, there would be more uneven participation. So that's part of it. And then back to the advisory, that's where we can check in with students, and advisors can check in one-on-one. We're noticing different kinds of warning signals. for example, students who aren't wanting to use their video is a warning signal sometimes. That might be a sense that they're feeling overwhelmed or something's going on where they don't want to be seen. So things like that are part of how we're relearning supporting students online.
Oh, I see. Are there any tips in terms of getting a clue from students? Do you have any journaling, or is it mainly advisory, or are there any kind of ways for kids to reach out, or you to catch the signals of these students?
So every morning advisory begins with a journal prompt, and that's a really helpful way to get a kind of a pulse for each student. And at the end of the day, every day we have a staff meeting. All the faculty gather together, and that's when we're flagging students of concern, as well as, lots of other things that happen in that meeting. But that's a time to check in and say, I didn't hear from so-and-so. I'm sensing something is wrong. We can kind of have a 360-degree view of that student, and then the advisor has the relationship with parents. It's another reason that advisory structure is really central.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. During this whole 9-week process with the change, have the parents been playing any active role in sort of helping you shape certain decisions? That was a question from a survey that I think is relevant to a conversation.
Yeah, I think most of all about academic pacing, how fast we should be going, and how is it really going at home. Sometimes students will present one way for peers, but parent might say, actually, it's been really hard. That helped us get the sense that when we were trying to do everything we normally did online, it was really counterproductive and was causing more problems than it was worth. And of course, there's a variety. Some parents are saying, we need more. And that's where we've done more to offer optional extensions, but not have that be something that's required of all.
I see. In terms of student choice, how are you embedding during this distance learning? Or is it part of the independent learning?
It's still central. So the way our quests work, it's always answering a question that you have to go on a journey to figure out the answer to. And so that's still the case online. And so each student or group is coming up with their own answer, whether it's, a science challenge or a humanities question. How they respond to the question is still really their own. And there's always a huge range. We've done a lot more this term, creative writing, had a bunch of writing challenges, and that's an area where students can choose. We try to offer an ultimate choice, any topic that brings out your creativity. So it's kind of choice within parameters.
I see. And switching here a little bit about the advisor and quest, there are some questions probably from the teachers that I know it's not easy to simple answer, but what are some of the tips you might have in terms of training teachers to be a Millennium School teacher? Like if Japanese teachers or teachers in Japan would like to introduce things like quest, what are some of the basic foundational things that the teacher trainings have to involve? I know it's a really massive, big question, but
yeah, it's a great question. I think there are probably two kind of essential techniques that are at the center. The first is quest, the second is forum, and those kind of both show up in other parts of the school, but I think that's what's the most different. So quest it's a whole philosophy of project-based learning that also includes social emotional learning, and it's essentially a redesign of how you think about teaching, where you're no longer just giving out knowledge, but you're much more facilitating a journey. It's a bit more of a tour guide. Your expertise is the territory well, and these people don't. But you want them to have an experience and to experience the information versus just receive. And with Forum, it's about becoming skilled and willing to be authentic. And that's what adolescents need from adults. You know, they have been absorbing so much from their parents, and now for almost every adolescent, they want to push off from parents and find other adults. And that can be very difficult for parents, but it's also really natural and healthy. And they'll come back to their parents later if that process goes well. So because school takes up so much of their lives, those other adults are in school most of the time. So it's about adults who are willing to see themselves as mentors as much as teachers, willing to be weird, to be themselves, bring their hobbies out, to share their struggles, to share when they failed, and to host conversations where they're not in charge in a kind of broadcast way, but they're more, it's more like this, fireside chats, conversations you don't know exactly what's going to come up, but you know it's important that they have space to talk and to reflect. So that's a skill set that is available to people, but we don't necessarily learn that, certainly not most teacher training programs. So that's why, you know, we're looking for people who want that, and then we can develop it further.
I see. I think especially in Japanese context, ability to be vulnerable and show your not be afraid of having made some mistakes is not easy for any Japanese in our culture in general. But is there any culture of tolerance that you're consciously building at Millennium School that maybe the teachers here can use as tips?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think that this age, early adolescence, is when students' worldview really develops. And worldview meaning kind of your perspective on people who are not like you in particular. And I think how kids go through adolescence really shapes this for the rest of their lives. You know, fundamentally, do you lean in with interest when someone is different, or do you push back or make fun of, or worse? So we think it's essential. It's why one of the premises of our school is that when conflict comes up or when emotional difficulty comes up, it's worth stopping what we're doing and attending to the conflict or the distress. Because you can't pretend that you can still learn. You know, if a kid just had a huge fight with their friend, they're not going to listen in math class. They need to be able to process that. And if they process it well, then that's actually the prize of this age, that they're learning how to be around other people. So that the cultural tolerance and attention to equity and privilege is really central, and it's become more and more central as we've gone on. It's designed into our courses. So we're trying to tackle real world tricky problems, like where we live, homelessness as a huge problem, or right now how the pandemic is hurting some people so much more than others. And then in how we talk about conflicts within the school. So really focusing on conflict resolution as one of the best ways to teach social emotional skills, because you remember conflicts. They're important. And so that's a time when you're really open to learning something and will stick with you.
That makes sense. So that's the teachers are really modeling the behaviors that you like to see students.
Right. And including the part about being imperfect.
Yes, none of us is.
Yeah. Do that all the time.
Yeah, even this English captioning that I try like 10 times and I didn't realize it wasn't picking up your sound so well. So unfortunately, I would like to continue our conversation, but I think our time is almost close to the end. So last questions related to kind of the future. There's a questions about like, how are you planning to support kids and families during summer? Are you planning to have some online courses or additional support like throughout this transitional period?
Yeah, we are we're making a package of invitations, we call it. We don't like giving required summer work. So we want summer to have a different spirit about it for kids, with a few exceptions if there's a really important remediation. But for the most part, we give a series of invitations. So there'll be invitations across different subjects. And this summer, we're also playing with an invitation to a personal set of challenges. We have, you've seen this, Emmy, this idea of a set of essential experiences that help you figure out who you are and what matters to you and what you can do. So we're going to be offering a chance to play with those experiences, to choose a challenge you want to take on for yourself. Everything from keeping a journal, starting a meditation practice, making a meal for your family, resolving a conflict among friends, things like that. And then documenting how it went, sharing that with friends. So I hope that will be something that feels different from school, but still brings them kind of to an edge of their own learning.
That's great. I guess having these kind of options laid out, I think helps kids and families to choose what they'd like to work on. And I think that'd be very helpful. In terms of going forward for this school, I think this is a very difficult question, but do you have any visions from like 5 years from now? I know you're right now like managing like right now, right here, but
the vision is not to grow or to, we don't want to open a high school or expand our lab, but it's to reach more people by being extremely open to our failures and open to our successes, and just sharing what we're doing, because we have kind of a huge privilege of freedom that we get to cook up new curriculum. We don't have a lot of requirements in that way, relatively. So that's to really be an open laboratory is the idea, and just keep sending out pieces of this that are useful, curriculum, training teachers, things like the essential experiences. So I hope that's how we can be more and more useful, even while we stay small as an in-person community.
Wonderful. You've already made such a big impact in Japan, working with other educational curriculum or school and training programs last year. And we definitely look forward to having you back again next year when things are hopefully back to somewhat normal.
Me too. I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to being over there again.
Do you have any kind of last word of wisdom to audience in terms of how to kind of, survive together, or how to manage together with kids during this time?
What's coming up right now is something that a friend has told me, which is, if in doubt, if you feel trouble starting, if you feel stress starting, just slow down. And that's felt like a lot of what we're trying to do, to be gentle, to take some deeper breaths, just to slow down and focus on the connection with each other, which is more important, I think, than any one academic unit. So I know it's been hard for me as a parent too, with my kids at home. It has been stressful.
You have very small children.
Yes. Yeah. So we're fully occupied, but yeah, I would say that. And maybe last thing I'll say is just an invitation that I love being in dialogue with other teachers and educators and parents. So to feel free to reach out in any way to share ideas. That's something that fuels me and fuels our school. So it's always welcome.
Thank you so much. And I guess our time is up, and we really appreciate you taking time with us today, and hope we'll get a chance to talk to you again soon in the future.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Emmy. This was fun.
Thank you so much.
本日のレポートの全日本語内容を含めたイベントレポートを note.com/LXC の方にアップの予定です。また今後のイベントは Facebook や Twitter でぜひご覧ください。本日はご参加ありがとうございました。